This program is designed to provide general information with regards to the subject matters covered. This information is given with the understanding that neither the hosts, guests, sponsors, or station are engaged in rendering any specific and personal, medical, financial, legal, counseling, professional service, or any advice. You should seek the services of competent professionals before applying or trying any suggested ideas. Ahoy! Captain David Gallimore welcomes you aboard the Regenerate Show, live Mondays, 10 a.m. Pacific on K4HD Radio at k4hd.com. We dive into the real messy work of transforming our lives, leadership, and organizations. Bring your hot mess and confusion. Leave with clarity, courage, and confidence. Together, let's strengthen our resilience, accelerating the health of ourselves, people, planet, and profits. Now, here's your host, Captain Dave, your personal regenerator. All aboard!
Ahoy, and welcome to Regenerate. I'm Captain Dave, your personal regenerator. During the show, I strive to create a safe space for my guests, which today will be me. Turns out a lot of people that wanted to be guests have deferred because of their fun summer holidays, which I don't blame them at all. It's beautiful weather here in Seattle. I hope you're enjoying your summer. This is a space where true stories about the messy middle of personal, professional, and organizational transformation get told. These stories are so needed right now, given the challenging times of global political and climate uncertainty, as well as the disruption that's happening almost every day, I hear in the news, related to generative AI. So we're all navigating a lot of change all at the same time. But I want to point to hope. Regenerate is about how you can become somebody who brings more resilience, purpose, authentic energy to the people you love, including yourself, your family, your friends, your community, and hopefully to our planet, our only ship that desperately needs our loving support. So what is the definition of regeneration? For those of you that have been with me for a while, you know that it really is about the logic of life. How do we, rather than extract and not return value back into our systems, be it ourselves, our families, our communities, then that is not going to be a sustainable way. And Mother Nature has been at this now for 3.8 billion years. And I think she's learned a thing or two. So it's how do we transform from merely doing no harm, which is the definition of sustainable living, and becoming more like a healthy forest, endlessly regenerating, resilient, abundant conditions for all life. And I would include across not just today's generations, but tomorrow's generations. And I think about my son, Ian, and my daughter, Catherine, and my daughter, Catherine's daughter, Daisy, who's now coming up to be 3, and we're soon to have a grandson any day now. So how do we help ourselves and those around us flourish? And so one of the things that I like to come back to again and again on this show is when you become a student of regeneration and become a teacher of regenerative transformation, when you take just one insight from a conversation like we're going to have today, and I invite you to pay it forward, that's when the compound interest of time well invested, a concept coined by my mentor, Joe Pine, author of the fabulous book, The Transformation Economy, which I highly, highly recommend. The secret to regeneration, I believe, is learning from people who are living it. They're in the mud, their fingernails are dirty, although I did cut my nails today, in the messy middle, not from the polished performative summit of the peak. And then doing the inner work to shift habits, beliefs, and ultimately our identity. And then sharing what works for you with others. And individually, we can create ripples. And together, we create waves of regenerative change. And that's what this show is all about. So thank you for being here. My commitment to you is have fun today, to leave you inspired, and to leave you with just one thing you can apply before you go to sleep tonight. So please grab a pen. Transformations happen here. So the story that I'm going to be telling is about this topic of when your own brain says, not today, or I don't feel like it. How have I, which I often have those inner conversations, inner dialogue, how have I been able to move forward? And I hope that if you listen to this show on YouTube or Facebook or on any of the podcasts after Rebel, our producer, helps me post today's episode on all of your favorite learning platforms, that you will share one strategy that's worked for you when your brain is saying, not today, or I don't feel like it. So as I was advertising this particular episode, what do you do when the biggest resistance to your voyage, what you say most matters to you, what happens when that resistance is just inside your head? In this episode, I'm going to get really real and authentic about how my own brain wiring. So for those of you that haven't watched this show before, will soon learn that I have ADHD, neurodiversity, with a little sprinkling of rejection sensitivity and a little bit of autism that I learned just a few months ago in a group called Traction, led by Don. I've just blanked his last name. Don Baker. Wonderful, wonderful, articulate, thoughtful, and very smart guy who's been leading a number of these groups over the years, helping me get wiser about how I'm wired and how my personality can either support me or kind of get in my own way. And then something new that I learned about called demand avoidance, which is this very slippery slope of feeling like this is something, this voyage that I want to be on is really important. And yet I do things to sabotage. It's a very odd thing. And so I'm still learning about it, and I'll share with you a little bit about that. So working with my coach, who has been with me over a year now, Chris Rue out of Wales, we just had our monthly check-in, and we've been focusing on nurturing wealth, marketing, sales, and health. So those 4 pillars are what we're working on this year. And I'll tell you, it is not for the faint of heart. So without further ado, I'm going to tell you 3 stories, and hopefully this puts a face, my face, on some of these concepts that I've been sharing in the past. Rebel reminded me to highlight a couple of the past episodes. So I will be doing that as well throughout our time together. So the first story I'd like to tell is when I woke up in November of 2021 and realized that our world leaders were not quite coming together. As Greta Thunberg, the activist, said, there was just more blah, blah, blah from our world leaders that came together in Glasgow, Scotland in November of 21. And the purpose of their meeting, called COP 26, is to come up with better ways of working together across the globe to start to realize the promises of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. There are 17 of them, and I'll put those in the show notes, as well as how do we collectively, regardless of whether Mother Nature is driving our rising global temperatures or not, it matters, but some people believe that it's 100% Mother Nature. Regardless, we need to adapt. There's no guarantee that planet Earth is going to sustain 8 billion people. So how do we come together? And in November, I realized that this was not happening at the pace that the collective wisdom of our scientific community, both climate science as well as geology science, as well as oceanography science, environmental science. And so I went to my wife, Margaret, and I said, hey, I really have had so many opportunities, so much privilege. And I think it's time to really help be a part of the solution. And she said, I'm all in. And what started out with so much promise, talking to people that I knew, who I respected and thought that they would be very interested and even willing to hire me to help them become part of the solution. How could they personally, or how could the organizations that they were leading make these little tacks, to use sailor language, to tack toward this regenerative, sustainable future? And after about 200 and some conversations, I didn't get one person to say that they would be willing to invest time and money with me. They all said, oh my gosh, that's such a noble thing, but they weren't willing to put time and money into some of these ideas. And so I had to wake up and pivot and kind of return to my roots of executive coaching and startup business coaching and founder coaching. And I'll tell you, there was a lot of my brain that was saying, not today, I don't feel like it. And specifically around outreach, marketing, and sales to potential clients. I eventually did overcome that by reframing. I think that's one of the key ideas that I want to share with you today. Sorry, gets me choked up just even talking about it. That reframing from a perceived negative experience or fear of a future negative experience or outcome, reframing that in a way that allows you to move forward. And so the reframe for me was, okay, I'm just reaching out to people who I know or who I think could be referred to others that they know, and also be open to just talking to people as I teach sailing on the water or read a book or an article, and just be in service. So I'm not selling myself, I'm in service. And I coined this phrase, consultative selling. And when I would ask a client or a potential client, hey, what's that one priceless and essential topic? Could be something that's keeping you awake at night, or it could be something that is an opportunity that you've been struggling to come to a decision, and you just really value a sounding board. And people go, well, that's an interesting question. I haven't been asked that recently. What's priceless and essential? And I say, and regardless of what happens during our conversation, I just want to give you value. I just want to pay it forward. And that reframe and that shift has been really remarkable for me. I've attracted, over the last 4 years, several hundreds of thousands of dollars in coaching. It's still not covering our monthly nut, which is why my wife, Margaret, and I, we sold our home, trying to cut our sales to fit our cloth. But that is a strategy that reframing strategy was one that really, really worked well for me. And I offer it to you with love. As I continued to work with clients, not necessarily in a regenerative way, I also learned that when my brain says, oh, they're probably not that interested. Those 200 plus conversations, they weren't interested. And I think what I learned in talking to clients, solving their challenge first and delivering value every time we met, it was to be curious and to ask questions. So for example, I would often ask someone, a client of mine, hey, what do you think about this whole rising global temperatures? Um, from a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being Mother Earth is 100% responsible for the changes in our climate and the hot summers. Oh my gosh, my friends in Europe, they are just absolutely sweltering, and other parts of the world. Canada's on fire, 900 and some fires. Knock on wood, thankfully nothing here at Lake Cushman this year. But boy, it could happen, right? Because everything in the West and apparently up in Canada is tinder dry because of lack of snowpack up in the mountains. So I would ask, 1, is Mother Earth responsible? Or 10, human beings responsible for what we're experiencing? And it was just really interesting to be curious. A lot of people, at least in the Seattle area, more, I guess, environmentally interested or environmentally aware. We're kind of in the 6 to 7. Sometimes people were 11 out of 10. I was one of those people until I started to read a lot more and talk to smart people, smarter than I, about, yeah, it's probably somewhere in the 6 or 7 that, Mother Earth, she's in a receding ice age, and that's a lot of what we're experiencing. And it's being accelerated by our movements, burning fossil fuels, and just especially in the developed world, United States, Europe, etc. We've been the biggest polluters because of our fossil fuel based lifestyle, and so it was just really interesting to hear people's scores, and it got them thinking. And sometimes I would just leave it at that, and then other times I would get their score and I would share mine, which went from about 11 and a half down to 6, based on what I now know. I would ask the question, well, what are you doing based on what you know, or given your score? If you think human beings are part of the challenge, what are you doing about that? And that's where it got very interesting, right? Some people said, well, I'm recycling. I go, good for you. And I was at that place, right? Some people said, and I shop locally. Good on you, right? And that's super valuable, especially if you can eat more organic. I know it's expensive these days with cost of food, but that idea of eating locally, eating as fresh as you can, ideally not with pesticides and other things, especially if you're eating berries and other foods that can contain the leftover pesticides that farmers often use. So they would then often say, well, I bought an electric vehicle. Good on you. And so there would be a discussion, right, about what they were doing about it. And I then would often ask, and do you think that's enough? And many people, especially again in the Seattle area or in Europe where I have other clients, or Australia, they would say, no, I'm not doing enough. And so that would open the door. And if they were a business owner, we could talk about, how can, we as leaders act first ourselves and be people of integrity? And then how do we lead by example within our family, within our team? Some of my clients are the CEO or the founder. So how do you lead the whole organization to be just a little bit better every day? And there's often a tendency for their brains, be it my clients, their families, their teams, their community, not today. I don't feel like it. And so on that front, what I've learned is how important it is to get kind of clear about, well, what does good look like, or what might the end, how would a better future look, right? If we're feeling overwhelmed, not today, don't feel like it, well, at least you can take 5 minutes and do a little bit of drawing or a little bit of journaling and ask the question, well, what does the future for this topic that I'm confronting, where I'm feeling stuck, what does good look like, or what does great look like? Because often, at least for my brain wiring and perhaps for yours, if we're not clear about where we're headed, and you could use the word goal, or you could use the word mission or vision, or just intention or purpose. If we're not clear about whatever label you want to put on that future state, you're likely not going to manifest it. You're likely not going to be able to create it. And I use the analogy as a maritime captain. If I set off from Thai Marina, which is our local marina in Tacoma, and go out to Commencement Bay, and then I take a dogleg right up the commercial shipping channel in southern Puget Sound, past Des Moines, past Seattle, where am I going? Am I just out for a little sail about, or am I actually wanting to get somewhere? And if I don't know where that somewhere is, I'm not going to get there, am I? And I know it seems obvious, right? When you're in your car, or you're in an airplane, or you're in a train, or you're in a bus, you have clarity about where you're going. Some people get on the bus just to ride the bus, but most of us get in a vehicle to get somewhere. We have an objective, we have a purpose, we have a goal. So consider, if you're hearing something in your brain, not today, I'm not feeling like it. Consider that maybe you're just not really clear, and therefore you're not inspired. You're not able to look beyond the feeling of resistance. That's been a really, really powerful technique, right? To get clear about, where am I going and what am I doing? And invariably, when I take that time, and sometimes it's been really helpful to talk to Margaret, my wife, about it, or recently I've been talking to my son about it. And I think this is where a coach can be incredibly valuable, like I had with Chris Rue, and before him with Dorothy Villeneuve, and before her, Johanna Wise, and a number of coaches before them. Because, at least for me, I get wrapped up in my own bullshit. And how do you get out of your own BS? Well, it's helpful to talk to other people. And certainly, when you're the founder, or the CEO, or the top leader of an organization, it's incredibly lonely. I've been there as an executive in the corporate world. It's incredibly lonely, and you can't really confide in other people to help you get clear. Your team or your organization that you're leading, they assume that you know where you're going. And sometimes that's not so clear, especially with all the disruption that's happening with generative AI. I was listening to a podcast, Patrick Boyle, who does financial um, related YouTube videos. Fascinating guy, really smart, a little wry humor, always has a couple sarcastic digs in his 20 to 25-minute videos. But he was talking about, how people are just not really paying attention to what's going on with generative AI. And they do that at their detriment, that CEOs are really scared about what Wall Street, if they're a public company, what Wall Street is going to be expecting of them, which is to cut people, replacing people with Claude or ChatGPT or Gemini or any of these other tools, um, rather than figuring out a way to enhance the human being. So yeah, it's a very, very interesting time as a leader, and it's more challenging than ever, I think, to get outside perspective. So yes, that is my short commercial for the value of coaching. So we're going to stop for a brief commercial about my own coaching business offers. And when we come back, I want to talk a little bit about how identity can be one of the biggest resistors in this voyage, and how to quiet the negative self-talk, because our identity, our ego, is colliding with where we want to go. So please take a moment and enjoy this short commercial about Regenerative World Group.
You're listening to Regenerate with Captain Dave, your personal regenerator on K4HD Radio. We'll be right back. Are you feeling overwhelmed? Are you ready to regenerate and live the life of your dreams? Start the transformation now. Call Captain Dave at 253-237-2558. Stop overthinking. Again, call 253-237-2558 or go to regenerativeworldgroup.com to book a free, no-obligation clarity call. Let's get back to Regenerate right here on K4HD Radio for more life-changing transformations. Here's your host, Captain Dave, your personal regenerator.
Ahoy, and welcome back. If you're just now joining us, I've been my own guest, as many of the people that I was hoping to have over the summer have deferred because of family plans, vacation, life. So I'm thrilled to be here talking a little bit about when the inside voice says to something that's important to you, not today, I'm not feeling it, how do we move forward? And so I shared in the first half of the show the journey that I've been on about how to use reframing to move from that resistance and thinking a little differently about why am I doing what I'm doing, and what could the value be for somebody else, especially in sales and marketing. It's not about me, but it's in being in service to them. And then we also talked a little bit about how important it is to really be curious and to be clear about what the future could look like, right? If you're not feeling moving forward, then maybe there's a little bit of lack of clarity, a little fuzziness about where you're going. And I'm thinking about, well, during the break, I was thinking about that interaction between Alice and the Cheshire Cat in Alice in Wonderland, where Alice is kind of walking through the forest and she comes to a T in the path. And the Cheshire Cat is up in a tree, and Alice asks the Cheshire Cat, well, which path should I take? Which road should I go, left or right? And the Cheshire Cat asks, well, where do you want to go? And she said, I don't really care. And then he said, well, then it doesn't matter which road you take. But also in just sort of how my brain works, another related thing about paths is the Robert Frost poem about, I chose chose the path least traveled, and that has made all the difference. And the poem is called The Road Not Taken. So sometimes it can be a good thing, right? To if you don't know where you're going, it's okay to just take a step and see if you like it. And if you do, take another step. And if you like that, keep going. If you don't like the next step or the next couple steps, it's always a tricky one, right? Do I keep moving forward in a direction that I'm not quite sure about? I have to say I've spent 4.5 years still trying to answer that question, right? When do you stop and reflect and maybe go back a bit? Or there's often another T in the path, and you take that other path. I was talking to my son Ian a couple nights ago about, he's interested in exploring his entrepreneurial life. He's a very gifted engineering mind, excellent hands-on. He's got every tool that you would ever need. And so we were chatting about, what really might light you up in terms of woodworking or small engine maintenance or property management or something like that. I hope to get him on the show. I think it would be really, really fun to hear a young person's perspective about this question of getting clear about where you're going. But if you're not clear about where you're going, how do you take the next step and the next step and the next step? So the second story that I wanted to talk about now is related to identity. And this, there was a crisis of confidence that I had in the summer of 2024. I did think about taking my own life. It was a very dark time. I'd had a number of clients that said, "Hey, I love what we're doing. I'm getting so much value, but my job is at risk." This was kind of when generative AI was starting to eat people's lunch, and I have a number of tech executives or software development leaders. And they, basically that summer I lost about half of my clients for, as I understood it anyway, nothing that I did or didn't do, but just circumstances. And coinciding with that was a little bit of family challenge. My wife's mother passed shortly in that time frame. My own mom was now less capable and needed a lot more support. She's now 96, just turned 96. So that was a challenging time. And my sister, Pamela, was ill with her third cancer, which eventually did take her life in May of 2025. So yeah, 2024 was a really dark time. And I'm forever, forever grateful to Don Baker, whom I mentioned earlier, who leads these neurodiverse ADHD, autism, rejection sensitive dysphoria, and any other alphabet mental health wiring group called Traction. Highly recommend him. I'll put his information in the show notes as well. But it was a dark time. I'll just leave it at that. Or as Margaret would say, no, you didn't leave it at that. You kept talking for a little longer than you needed to. So I reached out to Don Baker, kind of a 911, saying, "Hey, I'm really not today. I don't feel like it. I don't know how I'm going to move forward at all." And first of all, what he really helped me understand was that there was this thing in my wiring called rejection sensitive dysphoria, RSD. And he highly recommended that I talk to my psychiatrist about using a medicine called guanfacine, which I said, I'm willing to try almost anything. And it was really helpful. That plus joining his traction group. And I didn't realize the value of group work. I'd always done one-on-one coaching or one-on-one counseling or one-on-one psychiatry. But boy, the group, super smart people, many of whom had been in the group for a number of years. So that told me a lot, right? That this was a group that was here for the long game, wanting to really continuously get clearer, become more self-aware, develop new strategies. And then us newbies coming in, we would bring uh, similar challenges, and some of the old guard could really say, well, have you thought about this, or have you thought about that? It was so valuable. Oh my gosh. And now that I've been in it for about 2 years, um, I'm kind of that elder and have been able to, you know, point to hope primarily, and then offer to be a sounding board outside of the 90-minute weekly traction program. So about that same time, I also worked with a gentleman, Mathieu Graham, and he was our first guest on the Regenerate show. And Rebel reminded me, hey, that was a really good show. You might want to refer to that show on this show. And so thank you, Rebel. As always, you have my back. And so I'll put that in the show notes. But what came out of my work with Mathieu Graham was absolutely foundational. And it all started with this idea that just because I'm alive, just because I'm breathing, I'm enough. And I'm looking for a pen. Again, how my brain works. And he had me draw a circle. I did use indelible ink. I would draw a circle, and he would remind me that a circle, even though it's kind of odd shaped, it does close on itself, right? It's a beautiful example of wholeness and worthiness. And that was a small symbol, maybe, or metaphor that I am enough. I'm not my title. I'm not my $300,000 a year salary. I'm not my position power. I'm not my, just fill in the blank. I'm a man. I'm a person who's lovable and loving, and is worthy of self-respect and of giving respect to others. Now, I have to admit that I had to kind of fake it a little bit till I made it, but that was really valuable. And Mathieu recommended that I read a book, and that title just came out of my head, but it will come back in just a moment. The Chimp Paradox is the name of the book, and I'll put that in the show notes as well. And it's written by a very smart fellow out of Britain, and very accomplished coach for high performance athletes, CEOs, and other leaders across the globe. And what he really taught me was, when our identities are being attacked, or we perceive them being attacked. In my case, I'm no longer part of the corporate team. I'm no longer a vice president. I'm no longer these things that had defined my identity. I felt like I was a ship without a rudder, and just kind of being buffeted by the seas and the wind, and where to go. So yeah, freeing oneself from ego. And the other person that really helped me do that, in addition to Mathieu Graham, was a recommendation by Bert Eckert, who is my second guest on the Regenerate show. And I highly recommend revisiting his episode, because he's all about emotional mastery, among other performance, human development, and high performance concepts. And I learned from Bert about Michael A. Singer, who wrote the book, The Surrender Experiment, and Living Untethered, and a few others. And he's a software executive who's also a Buddhist. And man, I'll tell you, I learned so much about letting it go, letting it go. My other mentor, Marshall Goldsmith, uh, who's also a Buddhist, he definitely was modeling that behavior, and I've tried to model that behavior, but it sometimes requires a reminder. So one of the other strategies when you're not feeling it or not today, and you say to yourself, well, maybe I could listen to a uplifting motivational talk. I really have enjoyed Paul McKenna. He's a hypnotherapist, hypnotist, but he works with high performance people, sports figures, and corporate and government leaders, and I think he's the real deal, and he's been very helpful in reminding me that I am not my title, I'm not my money, I'm not my uh, work, power, any of those things. I'm whole, I'm complete. And but that's, I think, going to be a muscle that I'll get to strengthen for the rest of my life, I suspect. So the last story that I'd love to tell is related to just, I would say, the last several months. And you may have, if you've been listening for a while, you may have heard last week's show, which was about the Swedish death cleanse. And Rebel asked me to do a little bit more on that. So I thought I would talk a little bit more about this last several months of Margaret's and my and our son Ian's life. And when the not today or I'm not feeling it has come up, and boy, has it come up a lot in the last several months. So I'm going to tell that story. So I want to say January timeframe, maybe probably closer to fall last year. Yeah, fall last year was really when Margaret and I were looking with not rose-colored glasses, but real glasses, saying, okay, what's really going on with our lives, our financial life, especially. And it was just the two of us. Our son was living here at Lake Cushman. His two dogs were no longer in our house in Federal Way. Our Siberian Husky was on her kind of final months, and then she did pass earlier this year. So we didn't need a half an acre. We didn't need 3,800 square feet plus a shop, and certainly didn't need a pool, not regenerative at all. And so we decided to get the house ready for sale. And we've done this 5 times before, and very, very successfully. In fact, it's one of the things I love about my wife, Margaret. She's highly creative, but she's fearless when it comes to renovating homes. And so we jumped in together, and Ian helped us a little bit as well when he could. And we got the house ready for sale. But man, there were so many times when my inner critic, the chimp on my shoulder, was saying, I don't feel like it. I'm not going to do that today. And I started to realize that I could either have my excuses or I could have and enjoy my results. And that's a choice. Now, that was a really hard thing to hold up the mirror and say, okay, are you going to let your excuses drive the bus, or are you going to let what matters, the voyage, the destination that you want, which is to shed the house and the stuff related to it? Because if you just give in to the, I don't feel it right now and not today, nobody's going to do that work. We were running lower on finances to be able to hire somebody to do the whole thing. We did a lot of the work, but we did hire some contractors to help us at the very end. But it was a team effort. And so I'm sure in your life, there have been times where it just seems so overwhelming and how am I possibly going to be able to get this elephant? And so the idea of how do you eat an elephant? I know it's not very nice, but how do you eat an elephant? A bite at a time. And so we created these stickies on one of the windows in our house, and we put, all the things that we knew we needed to get done. And there was a great sense of satisfaction when we could move one of those stickies from the to do column into the doing column, and then finally into the done column. This is using Kanban for those of you that might know that. It's a very visual way of breaking an elephant into small, little bite-sized bites, and each of those bites is on a sticky. A lot of stickies, so be careful that you don't get overwhelmed on that. But that was a really helpful strategy that we used to help us when we just didn't feel like it, and not today. So the Swedish death cleanse, as Rebel had asked me to describe it a little bit more, this comes out of a Swedish tradition, apparently, that elders, before they die, before they become even incapacitated, they decide to shed those things that their children are not going to want on their death, like maybe a house or furniture or clothing or objects of art, all the stuff that people accumulate that at the time when they bought them were important to them. But we all know that the next generation doesn't necessarily value that very old Davenport that's got some chips and it needs to be refinished. And, they just want to have it not in their lives. If I die, they're not going to want to clean up that stuff. So the idea behind the Swedish death cleanse is you ask your children or your grandchildren, hey, do you want any of these things? And if you do, I'll keep them. But if you don't, then I'm going to donate them, sell them, bring them to the dump often. It's very hard. Oh my God, it was so hard to triage, especially art. And I mentioned in last week's show that we did a terrible job of triaging our art because we have some beautiful things. And so they're all in one room here at the cottage, and we've got them all wrapped up in blankets and, different safety boxes and things to keep them safe. But we did give away or sold a lot of furniture and clothing and shoes and electronics and just stuff that both or neither my son nor my daughter and others that we knew wanted them. And so it took a little bit of flexing the muscle. I will tell you that I learned to become better at saying, I do hard things. And I learned that from Caroline Santiago, who's part of a mastermind group that I have the privilege of being a part of on Fridays. And her son, Matthew, who I think is 12, maybe turning 13, when he saw his mom, my friend Caroline, working on her book, which, having worked on a book, I know how tricky that can be. He said, Mom, he looked her right in the eyes. He said, Mom, you do hard things. And she starts crying, and she told us the story. I started crying. All of us were, very, very emotional because there's something magical about saying to another person, I believe in you. You got this. That's another one of my phrases. But I've now since adopted the you do hard things phrase. And I think that it's not going to make it any easier, but it gives you the mindset shift to be able to overcome the resistance a little bit. And then, the last strategy that I would say is if you're really stuck, reach out to somebody. And yes, a commercial for life, leadership, and regenerative coaching, be a privilege to help you go from where you are to where you want to be, and enjoy the journey. So I don't know who my next guest will be next week. I'm still working through that. I hope that you found this to be valuable today. Every word that I spoke to you is from the heart, and I hope it's helpful. So thank you so much for investing your valuable time with us. And on behalf of he was one of my guests. On behalf of Rebel, myself, and our entire Talk for Media team, please stay healthy, stay safe. We need you. We are better together. Now let's go regenerate.
Thank you for listening to Regenerate with Captain Dave on K4HD Radio. We invite you to give yourself grace and embrace the messy middle. See you every Monday at 10 a.m. Pacific Time. Until then, you got this.